Metal Gear Survive is a case study in a phenomenon among Steam reviews where a game will be unpopular at first, but gradually develop a core audience of supporters to prop up its review score. Is it a good game? No. If you like the survival genre, I would handily recommend a playthrough of Valheim, even if you've already played it once, than playing Metal Gear Survive.
We're up to 125 so far.
To explain my history with this game, I played a lot of Metal Gear Solid 5.
Marker removed.
I didn't have a PlayStation coming up, so it was actually my entrance into the series. I was also clued into the drama that was occurring behind the scenes of the game at the time, but I'm by no means a fan of Hideo Kojima. I ended up playing Survive's open beta, which was functionally identical to the release product. I could have written most of this review without even having played the game as a result of that short playtime, because I've already extensively played it via MGS5, henceforth named V. But if I'm known for anything, it's trying anything once. So I bought Survive on sale and gave it a shot. Functionally, Survive feels like a fan mod of V. Most of the assets and mechanics of the name existed in V, but Survive's a zombie game. Yeah, and V had zombies. Survive has wormholes. So did V. Survive has resource collection and base building. So did V. Survive has melee weapons and a bow. I guess those are new. And you can tell given the animation for walking with a weapon drawn looks bad. Even the name is similar. It's basically impossible to move forward without discussing the behind-the-scenes drama of this game. So let's discuss the Kojima-Konami breakup. Like most breakups, it involves petty and embarrassing actions by both sides, which is alarming for Konami considering they're a multi-million-dollar game publisher. Kojima gets leeway because he's an individual. He's allowed to be upset that his decades-long relationship ended in such a way. You don't expect to find a company writing slam poetry tarnishing the legacy of their ex, however. To explain this drama, I'll give a quick context. Hideo Kojima was the developer behind the MSX2 game, Metal Gear, and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Despite its technical origins as a PC game, given the MSX was a home computer system, the series came to popularity with the release of Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. Kojima would then bookend the series with Metal Gear Solid 2 before bookending the series 3 more times with MGS3, 4, and V. Drama was entering Kojima's sphere with each release, and it only got worse with time. He's a polarizing figure among gamers. You either don't know who he is, really enjoy his work, or really hate him. And Konami didn't seem to like that. This is an industry where both consumers and publishers don't like rock stars, and where most people don't know the names of the developers who make their favorite games and just associate brands with games instead of individuals. This all came to a head with Metal Gear Solid V. The rumblings started when Kojima and his studio's name was taken off the promotional material of the game, resulting in him putting credits in all the levels. Rumors abound about Kojima and gang being fired from the company. A section of the game was cut off and sold as Ground Zeroes for $30. The main Snake voice actor was replaced with Jack Bauer. I mean, he had a valid reason, but that wasn't known at the time. Stephanie Justin was getting a little too comfortable with Kojima, a feminist controversy in the West about her mode of dress and lewd camera angles and an $80 million budget. The breakup was messy and saw the end of the Silent Hills game, which had an extremely popular demo at the time. Konami would become a pachinko machine developer, while Kojima would go on to produce a new game, Death Stranding. And if you look at the premise of that game and then look at Survive, things start to feel pretty similar. Meteorological conditions which require special gear to navigate and the player has a special connection to. Large metaphysical concepts that represent the end of the world. Traversing an open world and establishing connections to new areas to aid with further exploration. It wasn't just that Konami was taking Kojima's engine and assets and making a parody of MGS-V, it feels like Konami was also trying to make a parody of Death Stranding, which isn't out of the realm of possibility given the connections that likely exist between the employees of the two companies. Funnily enough, Survive had allegedly started development as a co-op expansion for V while Kojima was still at Konami, so it's possible the similarities started there. It would be one thing if Konami was using the project to give all the developers who stayed at the company a chance to get their emotions out of their system before moving on to the next big project. But looking at the list of games they've made since 2018 does not give this impression.
Oh, we're talking about Konami drama? I'm in. My name is Tetramorre, and I'm your resident Metal Gear enthusiast. Konami certainly pulled some pretty crappy stunts over the course of this game's development, and Kojima's career in general, but how about the drama on the fan side? Many were exceptionally excited to hear that a new Metal Gear game was coming out until they saw the first trailers in 2016. The game was instantly lambasted by basically everyone except the most diehard Konami fans, and perhaps for good reason.
I'm just so unimpressed.
Oh, God, no, Konami. It's over, man. It's over. Stick to your pachinko machine.
Sorry, I came here with an open mind. I was actually kind of excited, and the more I think about it, the more upsetting this is.
This is the perfect Pachinko Konami move. They couldn't get better. The most generic idea for a game.
I mean, yeah, I don't disagree. Based on these trailers, we couldn't have known that the game basically forgets about survival halfway through in favor of a base-building tower defense game, which is what you play for much longer than the alternative if you choose to keep going beyond the point that the story stops. And even then, the fact that zombies were in the game at all rubbed many people the wrong way. But let's talk about the fans' perception of Kojima really quick. For a long time, Kojima was heralded as a god of a director, and perhaps for good reason. MGS 1, 2, and 3 were all at the very least groundbreaking in their use of technology, gameplay, and story to convey themes. MGS 4 was met with criticism all around, which combined with staffing changes and the intense drama surrounding that game, saw Kojima knocked off his pedestal. Fans coming to realize that games are not solely made by one person. What a concept. But Konami shot themselves in the foot. By firing Kojima and removing the credits, they inadvertently reignited the fans' love for Kojima, and back on the pedestal he now stands. Initial expectations for Death Stranding were enough to show that much. Metal Gear Solid 5 could have had no story at all, and people probably still would have praised Kojima. In fact, in spite of the fact that most people think the story isn't that good, they assume that it's because Konami quelled Kojima's masterpiece by not giving him full creative liberty and firing him partway through the project, concluding in the game being unfinished. And Konami could have made the most incredible Metal Gear game the world had ever seen, and people still would have ripped them apart because of what they did to Kojima. I wish I could peer into an alternate universe, even just for a moment, and see what it would be like if Kojima had directed Metal Gear Survive. How would the fans react? If only. Oh, gee, so according to the response on this tweet, people actually were pretty gung-ho about it. Of course. Because the same people that lambasted Konami for Survive also said things like,
But oh, fuck, we got rid of Kojima and treated him like shit. Now he has his own company and he's making his own game. And we have no more creative talent left, or virtually none. What can we do? Oh.
Even though a lot of the people that worked on Metal Gear Solid 5 also worked on this game. This game was dead on arrival, and it is admittedly largely Konami's fault. But all of this really brought out a bad side in the fans as well. Shame.
So let's take Metal Gear out of the title and treat this like a standalone game. How are things? Well, that's kinda difficult given the game immediately starts with the end of Ground Zeroes, from the perspective of a Mother Base soldier and a lengthy cutscene establishing the premise. You know, Undead Nightmare is basically the same idea but with Red Dead Redemption, and it only took a couple minutes to set up the zombie premise. Tutorial time. The game gives us a gun, which I immediately assume I need to be sparing how I use the ammo because, hey, it's a zombie game. That was a mistake, since the game takes the gun and ammo away from you anyways. We team up with an XOF soldier and head to our base of operations, meeting an AI in the process. This place used to belong to a group called the Karen Corps, but they all died mysteriously, and we're going to be dragged along for a plot about finding out what really happened. So with our unlikely trio, we finally get into the meat of what this game is about: stabbing zombies through fences. In fairness, you actually get more options than that down the road, but not for a while. We explore our environment, setting ourselves up in the short term with food and water, and the main MacGuffin we're going to be collecting: memory boards. The AI is having a rough time and needs these to advance the plot and some progression elements. The first thing that immediately stands out is this user interface. V had a very slick UI system. When nothing's happening, it's clean and well presented. Everything you need during gameplay is contextual. You don't need to see what gadgets you have in V at all times unless you have it selected and ready to throw. Survive immediately plasters information and elements on the screen at all times. What the hell is this circle that centers on our ass supposed to even represent? So we get to know our health, stamina, hunger, thirst, and oxygen supply meters as well as what we have equipped. And sometimes we even slap a compass on screen as well. It's a mess, and it violates the basics of good UI design. The center of the screen is for the gameplay, the borders are for the information. And it would be another thing if our helpful AI didn't take 30 seconds to talk over any recordings we're listening to in order to explain the fundamentals of living every time these meters get low.
There are a number of researchers and engineers involved with the wormholes,
Keep an eye on
as well
the
as various
remaining
other
oxygen.
specialists here to investigate this world. And of
Captain,
course, there are a few corporate suits
Supply
from our
yourself with
illustrious
oxygen
sponsor.
by using Kuban
Along with
energy.
them, we have a medical team in case of
You can
emergencies
supply
and an
yourself
active
with
unit
oxygen
to carry
from
out
your
the research
iDroid.
and exploration on the front lines. Basically, the active unit is filled with military types. And
So it's not like you're ever really surprised by any of the life numbers becoming small. You have this beautiful user interface system that you could have just stole like you did with all the other assets. The area is very obviously surrounded by a dense fog, which looks terrible from the outside. There wasn't any way you could make the edge less pronounced. The fog is lethal to us until we track down an air tank and mask. But as a member of the Karen Corps, I can't show you what that actually looks like. Actually, it's because of the bandana, but I like that down the line when it's revealed we're on track to becoming a zombie ourselves, that our allies will pretend to be surprised at this outcome. Let's talk about our character. We're given a shot at character creation, using MGS-V's built-in creator, except with more females this time. We're also given armor slots and a number of options for decorating our character. But since the gear has stats, what we're wearing is often not what might be considered fashionable. Given there are cosmetic slots for the head and body, why couldn't we have gotten the vanity slots idea from Terraria? I do appreciate that I'm allowed to wear just a sports bra under my gear. This breaks the norms of logical gear choice in a zombie situation, but boy, are we stacked.
Hi, I'm Brooke Wyndham, and welcome back to the Wyndham Workout Disc 2 Challenge. Do you want an easy miracle? Do you want to lose a pound or two? Then you can turn this off right now. My workout's not for you. I'm talking to the woman who wants it all. Gotta pay for what you get. 'Cause size 2 clothes don't come to those too lazy to sweat. Hey, why'd you pause
We
it?
have a lot to cover.
You can actually do the same thing in V with these bathing suits, and both games even make you faster for eschewing clothing. I guess I'll state up front that I prefer to give Quiet her XOF gear. Even though we're presented with a choice in voice, I can only recall one time I ever heard the player character say something, and I'm not about to track that down for you, so just trust me on this one. What's confusing is that, mechanically, V's strengths lay in its gunplay and movement. But Survive really doesn't want you using guns, and pretty much any fans of this game will admit that it's only viable to run guns in the late game. As for movement, the fog slows the player down using a heavy stamina penalty. I presume because we're using an oxygen tank to breathe. Probably because the zombies are really basic and would be super easy to cheese if you were as agile as you are in V. Zombies are meant to be challenging threats in large numbers, and at first I thought Survive was insecure in its inability to render large numbers of zombies. But in the finale we see this is false. The engine is perfectly capable of handling a large number of entities, which begs the question of why we spend the game dealing with so few enemies at any given time. They're easy to lead on with a respawning supply of crystals. If a wanderer senses you, but doesn't fully detect you, then it will rush to your last known position, even if it should sense your new location as you move away. And even if you do get detected, a light jog can outpace them, let alone sprinting for a couple seconds. The real threat in the fog is... No, not him. That's Fluffy. He wanders the map and steps on wanderers, which usually telegraphs that you're coming up on him. He infinitely repeats a single path in a single direction, at least until the moment you kill him in the story, so it's pretty predictable and easy to work around him. I did miss him when he was gone. He's still pretty intimidating and at least he looks cool, but I managed to avoid ever getting in a fight with him. The real threat are the Wanderer variants, which have increasing levels of jank as they're introduced. We got boomers, exploding zombie trope, then you got mortars with ranged bomb attacks. These guys really didn't gel well with the other types, example given being the 15-minute defense segment where I hid behind a rock developing shell shock as the mortars demolished their own wanderers. Then you have trackers, which are highly mobile, so in theory they're strong where the other wanderer types are typically weak. But not really, because they aren't given any advantages in actually finding the player. Then you have these spider things, but only a couple times, and later these plant things which can pull you out from under a bush. More nuisances than actual threats. Put your best foot forward, right? Going off achievement data, less than half of the Survive player base ever reached these guys. Knowing this, it seems they got made and someone just slapped them with a good enough stamp that probably needed a couple ink refills during development. Like the melee combat. It's good enough to ship, but not good enough to win any kind of accolades. It's very easy to throw a swing at the same time as the enemy and still get clipped for it. Because surprise, surprise, it feels like you tacked zombies and melee weapons onto a game in a completely different genre. V didn't have a numerical and stamina health system. Melee attacks in V would do damage and knock down the player, and the player could do melee back, but in a very controlled manner. Because this is a game about gun combat and stealth, not a hack and slasher. In V, if you came up on an enemy, you could start CQC, then aim, and you would disarm the enemy.
Hands up. Guard-post captured.
Pretty cool. In Survive, you spam the left mouse button to swing melee weapons that might stagger the enemy. But okay, if gun combat's the strength of your parent title, then surely you would utilize that to your advantage. Maybe some zombies that use guns, or even human opponents. All the assets are already in the game. No? No human enemies? Okay. So we've butchered the stealth because we've taken away the enemy's ability to call alerts, and taken away most of the tools you can use besides just rocks. And we've butchered the combat because we've heavily stifled your ability to use guns and the things that you would shoot at. The name of the game is exploration then, right? The player has a limited supply of air, meaning a limited range they can explore the fog. You use that limited time to try and find transporters and containers, which will increase our effective range in the fog. This is probably the strongest part of the game, a gradual climb as we expand the bounds of the world. Each trip out during the early game feels like you're making progress towards something. When we find containers, we're subjected to a small lockpicking minigame. It's real time, and the price of failure is alerting zombies around you. Cool. When we find transporters, bringing them online means drawing the ire of wanderers, so a short defense segment. A sudden combat segment we may or may not be prepared for. A dilemma. Do we do it now or head back and try to prepare for it? How much combat gear do we carry in the field on the off chance we run into a transporter? Okay, I'm feeling it. Just drop some fences down and poke the zombies with your spear. If you bite off more than you can chew, just fall back on your gun. While this game does have a bow and arrow for us to use, I avoided it until the endgame because after you find the last transporter, there's no need to carry combat equipment anymore. If anything, you're incentivized not to by equipment weight. That's the titular survival mechanics poking their heads in to see what's up. We just run around, picking up everything in sight and depositing it back at base upon our return. V also had resources you would collect in the world, except someone decided to keep the quirk where it takes a second for the button press to perform the action. You know the one, where it spins in a radial? That's fine every now and then for making a button press feel more impactful, but not when I'm expected to do it a dozen times just to loot a single building. I mean, it was egregious in V and you only pick stuff up occasionally in that game. Despite the long list of materials that exist, I can only really name a couple, mostly because they bottlenecked and created problems. Gunpowder, copper, and lead for bullets. Alcohol and styptic for medical supplies. I don't think styptic powder even appears in the world, and I've explored roughly 90% of the map. No, I can prove that claim, the game measures. Not that there's much to explore. The map is basically just a modified version of MGS-V maps of Afghanistan and later Africa, with some modifications. I intentionally did not use the words minor modifications, because it is different, at least early on. But the Africa map is much more blatantly a copy, which fits because it only appears later in the game. Only 45% of players got to Africa, so there was less of a need to change it. Hey, Blood Dragon was a standalone expansion that copied its base map and modified it from there. And Undead Nightmare even just used the same map as base Red Dead. I think the difference lies in the mechanics. Both of these examples remind you of the base game, but don't necessarily make you want to go play them. Pretty much the entire time I was playing Survive, I was thinking about how much I would rather spend my time playing MGS-V. I mean, there is stuff that Survive has to offer that V doesn't, like Horde mode, cooperative Horde mode, and let me think about this and get back to you. The game expects us to outsource the exploration to our exploration team. This is where the endgame and microtransactions start rearing their ugly heads. If you don't want to spend any money beyond the starting price, you're limited to a single four-man team that goes out in the field and manages to wring the earth dry of whatever you want. This seems designed, however, to not solve any problems, just control the rate of your bleeding. While most of the missions take only 20 minutes, they also don't turn up too much in the way of supplies. Instead, if you want a good return, you spam the creation of really, really cheap medical supplies and send them off to do online missions, which is why the game is always online. If the game goes down for regular maintenance, which the game claims has ended each time it happens, you can't play. If you alt-tab, the game freezes to log back in as though it thinks I'm booting up Cheat Engine. If you want to expand your exploration team, you have to bust out 1,000 survival coins. Sorry Konami, I'm not buying your weird cryptocurrency. What's the exchange rate? 550 coins for $5, 1,150 coins for 10, 3,500 coins for 30 bucks, 6,000 coins for $50? The ratio changes slightly the more money you give, which is an intentional trick to encourage you to spend more money by giving you a slightly better deal and a slight excess of coins you'll have a hard time spending. So they want 10 bucks for us to be able to have more than 4 people in the exploration team, and more than one mission running at a time. And they try to force it by making most of the missions that pay out anything of value take real-time days. And once you reach the endgame, you have a base defense mode that takes real-time days as well, unless you want to shell out a little cash to speed it up. Oh, and the save slots are paid as well. Now sure, V didn't have multiple save slots, but it also didn't have an RPG progression system. Every time I saw that SV icon on a new mechanic, I got a little sad. You probably won't even be able to play this game in 10 years. I don't know, leave a comment if you're playing Metal Gear Survive in 2031. You will, however, be able to play MGSV, even though it too has an online mode and progression system tied to its online. It's still a completely functional and coherent game when played offline. I've interacted with its online mode maybe a dozen times and have still gotten an absurd number of resources out of it, like the Mankinis. There's no pressure to shell out cash for the mother base coins to buy a new FOB because having additional FOBs doesn't really do anything meaningful for the average person. So it seems like Konami learned from the failure that was V's microtransactions and tried again with Survive, years after people started calling out predatory microtransactions. Which was like dumping gasoline out of a helicopter onto the trash fire that was the Kojima drama, watching the fire climb up the stream and then engulfing the helicopter. And that brings us back to the opening, to the core people who actually stuck around and played the endgame. This game has its defenders. Like investors in any good cryptocurrency, you have a lot of people in the sunk cost mindset who paid for this game and played a lot of hours and possibly even paid for the microtransactions, trying to justify to everyone else why they should do the same. That Survive is some kind of underdog experience waiting for its time to shine. My recommendation after 36 plus hours? Play Metal Gear Solid V. Oh, Survive has a rough introduction and takes a while to warm up, well so does V, but it actually goes somewhere. What a world where the game whose ending was so absent an entire community formed around a conspiracy theory that there was actually a secret ending and it's set to arrive any day now, is still preferable to a game whose coherent ending is a hamster wheel.
Hey, I'm back. So, I made a 4-hour-long video on MGS5, and that's what qualifies me to be here. Although that knowledge is fairly moot because this game is not a continuation of the rest of the series, in Konami's words anyway. Well, that would be true, but this game actually does borrow or continue certain threads from the series that mean one would benefit from having the knowledge of the story so far in order to gain some context. It's not entirely necessary, though. The game starts out and we see some scenes from Ground Zeroes which tie into the story of this game, and that's about where the connections between Survive and Metal Gear Solid 5 end. With the exception that Sahelanthropus is back, and they mention Metallic Archaea, except this time they decided to pronounce it Metallic Archaea instead, and no, I don't know which one is correct. All I do know is that hearing them pronounce it like that was like nails on a chalkboard to me, but anyway, I'm digressing. If I was going to point to a game in the series that this one more directly follows up, it would actually be Metal Gear Solid 4, funnily enough. Some of you in the audience just got really confused as to how that's possible, so let's add some more confusion onto that. The villain of this game is the nanomachines that have been present in the series since Metal Gear Solid 1 and came into full force in Metal Gear Solid 4. This is actually a fairly natural progression of events. The villain of Metal Gear Solid 4 was the people using those nanomachines to control the world, and now the nanomachines themselves are the problem. No, the zombies in this game are not the same zombies that were in Metal Gear Solid 5 for some incredibly strange reason, but this is what we have. According to the PlayStation trophy data, only 16.6% of people that played the game actually saw the ending, and only 23.9% of people got to the second map, meaning they didn't really see any of the story. So the question many of you probably have is whether or not this game holds up to its predecessors, seeing as very few people made it far enough to even be able to ask. If the purpose of Pat's section of this video was to look at Metal Gear Survive and ignore the Metal Gear in the title, then my purpose is the opposite. How does Metal Gear hold up to the series' story? Wait, that doesn't quite work. Let's try Kingdom Hearts naming conventions. So how does Metal Gear Survive point to Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage hold up to the rest of the series? Yeah, I like that. Let's go with that. After the events of Ground Zeroes, we are treated to a scene of some people collecting dead bodies. One particularly important looking man surveys each one until stopping on ours, to which he says,
"Good to see you again. Forgive me for what I'm about to do."
We get a chance to create our character, and then the man tells us that we are the key to everything and then closes up our casket. We get some backstory. This man talks to another man named Gruen about some nonsense that won't make any sense the first time through, just a general sense that our character is important and vaguely infected in some way, and that our mission will have a large impact on the future of humanity. Our character, from now on referred to as the Captain, wakes up in a desolate-looking place, and we are told to head forward to base camp by the guy from the intro, who names himself Good Luck. On our way there, we meet Reeve and escape this facility, finding ourselves looking over the wreckage of Mother Base in the middle of this desert. Weirdly, Mother Base bears the logo of Diamond Dogs, which didn't exist when this game was supposed to take place. Maybe the logo was left on it because this game just reused the Metal Gear Solid 5 assets without thinking how they fit into the story. Another cutscene. This time Good Luck explains that we are going to another dimension and introduces us to our zombie pals called Wanderers, and that they can't truly die. Our mission is to recover the research data that the group that went before us, the Charon Corps, left behind, and to rescue survivors. The Captain is already infected with the same life as the Wanderers, so we have to do this in order to avoid turning. At the base camp we meet Virgil, our AI objective dispenser for this game. Good Luck's wormhole closes, causing the connection to be interrupted, and so Virgil is now our main point of contact. Their personality seems to be split into a male and female version, and they don't know why. This place, Dite, is similar to Earth but different due to the presence of Wanderers and the dust, the foggy barrier surrounding base camp. We need to gather data to activate the wormhole digger so we can talk to Good Luck again, and this is where the game's story gets out of the way for a while. One of the many ways this game's story differs from its predecessors is the fact that not everything in the game is trying to play into the theme of the game. Not every scene is somehow pivotal to the plot. My notes for this game in most of the sessions read like this. Session 6, going to rescue a guy. Guy I'm about to rescue asks us to get rid of his magazine stash. Cutscene 1, talking to the guy we rescued. He thinks this is all a dream. Name is Nicholas. We add new items, finishing analyzing Gruen's data, learn location of singularities. Virgil gets another saying wrong. End of session 6. For the most part, the game is just a string of objectives tied together loosely with the plot. Nothing wrong with that, but it does pull this game somewhat more in line with the rest of the medium rather than the games it shares a namesake with. A few highlights. We meet this guy, the Lord of Dust. We rescue a number of named characters. Miranda the medic, Chris the terminally ill child with a penchant for programming, Nicholas the funny guy who cooks on the side, and Seth, the other Mother Base soldier we saw get pulled into the wormhole in the opening. Seth was about to get shot by a guy named Dan, who along with Seth are the only two members of the Charon Corps remaining. We also rescue plenty of randomly generated folks that get the same getting put down in front of Virgil cutscene and generic thanks message. Gruen from the opening at one point comes on and starts helping us because Good Luck has been fired for insubordination. Later, he tells us Good Luck committed suicide, but doesn't give us a reason. He wants us to supercharge the wormhole digger because it wouldn't complete the connection to home without it, but it ends up summoning the Lord of Dust instead, who tries to get into the wormhole. Is that what Gruen wanted? Yeah, probably. It comes out later that Gruen was looking to get the Lord of Dust back to Earth so that they could use its energy, but of course this is a terrible idea for incredibly obvious reasons, so it won't come up again. Plenty of the cutscenes switch over to codec at really awkward or weird times. At least in MGS2 they tried to establish an in-universe reason for why they were switching to codec instead of staying in the 3D rendered cutscene. The real reason, of course, being that the cutscenes cost money and take time, and this is a lot easier and cheaper in the long run. All of this combined might make you think that the story doesn't matter, and you'd be right for the first 10 hours or so until things start ramping up. After a few failed attempts to leave Dite, Good Luck tells us through a pre-recorded message given to Virgil that our true mission here is to destroy the Lord of Dust. The only way to do that is to get a weapon available in the second circle of Dite, or as I like to call it, Africa. The FOB here is where the Devil's House was in the original game, and one of the memory boards is in the mansion that we find Code Talker in. This is probably just because I have a fondness of MGS5, but I liked being able to recognize these areas somewhat reimagined in a new way. The differences are enough to make them interesting to traverse at least once, like realizing the first room we go into in said mansion is the room that Code Talker was in, just with a huge hole in the wall. Soon we learn that said weapon is none other than Sahelanthropus, which wasn't invented until after this game began. Say, what's going on here? Also, Sahelanthropus being here sort of solves a plot hole I had with the original game, which is sort of funny in a way, but that doesn't make it any less egregious in that game. When we find it, we find Dan again, who tells us he hasn't killed anyone and that Seth shouldn't be trusted. Virgil and the crew trust him, but Seth is adamant that Dan is up to no good. Either way, we bring Sahelanthropus back to base, but before we can get back ourselves, Reeve calls in and tells us that Seth went AWOL, kidnapped Chris, and that they went back to base camp. When we confront him, he spills the beans. Firstly, the dust is made up of medical nanomachines, or what has become of them. They have evolved over time into a calm, sophisticated intelligence, far beyond what human beings have reached. They have become one hive mind and live in perfect coexistence. Their goal is to assimilate the entire human race into their fold, finally giving them the peace that they have been searching for 10,000 years. So this is actually pretty fascinating. The whole series has been about peace, in one way or another, so much so that one of the games is named after it. In Metal Gear Solid 3, the boss instills in Big Boss and Zero a dream of peace which they aim for the rest of their lives to accomplish. Every game is about either someone striving to attain peace through any means, or the main character striving to keep someone from disrupting peace further. The games also have a strong theme of free will, and the will of the individual, and how that can be used and abused by people. Snake is fighting for peace and for free will at the same time. He wants a future that is both peaceful and not under the thumb of an oppressive regime. And here, in Survive, a new extreme is pondered. The Dread Dust hold the key to actual peace, to helping the human race finally get over their differences and come together under one ideology. But in the process, free will must be sacrificed. Conflict comes with the presence of free will, so removing the free will factor is the key to peace, right? But is peace at the cost of free will even worth it anymore? Like a contrast of light and dark, what purpose does peace serve without the presence of conflict to contrast it? If we aren't able to think and act for ourselves, would we even be able to appreciate peace? I'm kind of astounded to say this, but I think this is pretty well done, actually. The problem, however, is that all of the questions I just asked, while interesting to ponder, don't really surface in any way in the game. Yes, the game does bring up the concept of peace at the cost of free will, but that's where it ends. A few minutes later, Seth, our only contact with the Dread Dust, is dead, and we don't really have time to stop and ask questions anymore. There are no scenes of the main characters waxing poetic on what it would be like for the Dread Dust to take over, taking away conflict and instilling peace. In a different game, perhaps one with the word solid before the subtitle, that's what we would have gotten, an actual exploration of what the game is implying here. As ham-fisted as those types of scenes can be, I think they do serve to help solidify the themes in a series that does struggle with some really difficult questions. After Seth dies, we black out and wake up later. Seth's presence awakened the infection inside of us, and we learn that Virgil is also infected. Their infection is what caused the male and female split, when they quarantined off the sick parts of their mainframe or whatever. The good news is that this awakening of the infection in Virgil means that they now have access to the Dread Dust's hive mind and everything it knows. Here's where we get some story bombs. Firstly, Dite is not a different dimension but Earth in the 22nd century. That explains all the stuff like Sahelanthropus and Mother Base having Diamond Dogs logos. The Lord of Dust is using the wormholes to travel back in time to assimilate everything in that time, and then once that's done, they go back even more, and eventually they will assimilate the whole of humanity. Alright, yeah, I think this is pretty cool actually. If we want to think about it too much, get into some questions about the quantum mechanics of the wormholes and stuff like that, then I could poke holes in it, sure. But for now, I think this is still mostly working. It'll get a little iffier later. We have to destroy the Lord of Dust so this vicious cycle will end. To do that, we need to use the Archaea Blades and the Railgun from Sahelanthropus. After a quick fetch quest, Chris completes the Archaea Blade trap, and then the Lord of Dust begins his assault on our base. We open up a wormhole and send Chris through it while everyone else sticks back to help fight the Lord of Dust. Eventually we shoot it with the Railgun, but it just reforms. Virgil realizes that the Lord of Dust has no concept of death and therefore cannot die. This is pretty lame, because it kinda just comes out of nowhere here with no development prior. Then, Virgil plays us another message from Goodluck, in which it is revealed that he and Chris are one and the same. Earlier, when we sent Chris through the wormhole, it ended up taking him back to 1943 instead of 1973. He used the device we gave him to create the technology that we have now, and he vowed to get the captain and everyone else out of Dite and save history. One of my favorite details about all of this comes in the form of the archives you collect as you find memory boards throughout the game. The female researcher, Chloe, is always wondering how Good Luck was capable of building all of the tech they have, but it was actually her research and work that enabled Good Luck to construct all of the technology in the first place. She dies wondering if Good Luck knew what was going to happen in the end, and thinks that she was doomed to die without accomplishing anything with no legacy to leave behind.
It seems I will die without knowing anything more about you than I already do. I find that to be almost as painful as death itself.
This is really sad, and I love it. It's easily missed too because Chloe's story is contained in the archives that are entirely optional. Chloe has a ton of character development in the form of these archives, and by a ton, I mean any at all, and significantly more than what any other character gets, including Chris, and that's one big reason why I don't think this twist works as well as it should. And to be clear, when I first saw this twist, I really liked it. Maybe it's because my expectations were so incredibly low, I was surprised to see a twist like this at all, much less one I didn't see coming. But now that I've spent some time thinking about it, it's not incredibly well established and makes little sense. Why would Virgil not play this message for us earlier, since it contained pivotal mission info? Why would Good Luck not tell us that Dite is just Earth in the future when we first went in? How does Chris survive his terminal illness, and how is he not in a wheelchair anymore? Of course, I know the answers to these questions. If any of them were readily explained, there wouldn't be a twist, but that just makes it a bad twist. The contrivances pile up like Wanderer corpses. Even ignoring the contrivances, this twist doesn't hit as much as it should, because here's the one line of character development we get from Chris.
You're right, you know. I won't live to see 20 with my disease. If you're going to kill me, you might as well just do it.
Yeah, that's about it, one line. The fact that he is treated as a non-character kind of helps to shroud the twist from becoming too obvious, but it also makes the twist less impactful. In the end, Virgil has to sacrifice themselves by becoming one with the Lord of Dust and teaching it the meaning of death, life, existence, everything that they learned over the course of working with the captain and the crew. I kind of like all this, but again, Virgil hasn't had enough character development for me to be attached enough to be sad about it. They do, and we blast him one more time, this time killing the Lord of Dust for good. And the credits roll. We get another scene afterward where we look wistfully at the place Virgil once stood, but then they come out of nowhere, a large scar on the side of their chassis. I actually expected this because I've played Peace Walker and knew these capsules were made to withstand nuclear war, which I appreciate. Anyway, their personalities have merged back into the female one. She is now complete, and she finally gets a proverb correct, something she's been trying to do the whole game.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
This is cheesy, but I like it. The real credits roll, but wait, this is a Metal Gear game. There has to be some big story reveal at the end of the credits. What will it be? Well, it's a conversation from the past between Good Luck and Gruen, sort of establishing that the reason he was disbarred and subsequently Epsteined is because he was predicting the future, because he knew how it was all going to happen. I'm not sure exactly how that makes sense either, because he was in Dite the whole time, but whatever. He thanks the crew and the captain for changing history by sending him back, and that he is going to fight for a better future. Aw. Too bad he dies. So how does it hold up? Well, for one thing, I don't think it's necessarily trying to be as philosophical as your typical Metal Gear story. It wants to let the gameplay shine a bit and get out of the way, largely sacrificing character development in the process. I was expecting there to be a way to talk to the characters at base camp, but there wasn't, disappointingly. On the whole, the narrative hits a lot of interesting notes, but doesn't quite reach the potential I think it had. Some things, like Chloe and the Dread Dust, work, and others don't. Compared to a lot of other games, the story is decent, but compared to a lot of the Metal Gear series, it falls short. And that's okay, honestly. Metal Gear is an outlier of a series in terms of storytelling, and this game didn't have to hold itself to that standard. I just wish that what it did better. But if I'm being honest with myself, in spite of this game's flaws, its contrivances, and its failures, there is one thing I can definitively say. It is better than Metal Gear Solid 2. And you can hear more about that molten hot take over on my channel later next month.
Alright, thanks Tetramorre. Hopefully I'll have this out
Before he hits 100 subs. If you made it this far, you'll probably enjoy his Metal Gear Solid 5 video. His Control video is pretty good too, and it's a lot shorter at only 1 hour 46, so no excuses about not having the time. Go check out his work and see if you like it, and only subscribe if you do. Wonder where Boulder Punch is at. Oh, that's awesome. I'd also like to thank the patrons on screen for their continued support, to which they get early access to videos as well as status updates on the Oblivion video. Speaking of, I'm announcing now that patrons will be receiving a week's worth of early access for the big project, which there will be a trailer for at some point. Anyone who donates before I hit export will be included in the credits, which goes all the way back to January, so if you want your name attached to what is easily my biggest and best work yet, you know what to do. Also, I want to put a side project up for vote. Eventually.
No clue when that's happening, though. Inshallah, brothers.